Good idea, Jim. This is why we have Jim here.
Yeah.
We pay him a lot of money to do this. So we're also a radio show.
Mm-hmm.
So when you hear music, like as an outro, you basically have 30 seconds
Live on Facebook
to fill
or YouTube.
To finish up your thought.
Okay.
However, whatever you say in between segments is still going to be on air.
On the video.
On the video.
It won't be on the podcast,
Right.
but it'll be on the Facebook Live
Okay.
and YouTube Live.
Kind of thing.
Great.
Nobody listens to those. So.
Okay.
I mean,
pay attention to the radio. Okay. Are we
Yeah.
live right now?
yes.
We're about to be. Yes, we are.
Okay, ready?
Uh-huh. And I just look at you guys, huh?
Yeah, we're just going to have a convo.
Okay, great.
Very similar to what we've been doing the last couple of days.
Yes. Perfect.
We'll see if we actually get to Jonathan Scotus today, because Friday morning we did not quite get there.
That's totally fine. We'll do whatever.
Yeah.
Warning, the Catholic Man Show is about to begin. If you're looking for dull, feel-good religion, or clap your hands, sit around the campfire kumbaya, you've come to the wrong place. We are dealing with toxic levels of authentic masculinity. I would say good luck, but luck is for pagans.
Welcome to the Catholic Man Show. We're on the Lord's team, the winning side. So raise your glass. Adam Minahan here, sitting with David Niles. We do have Jimbo Baggins with us. Pray for Juan, as he is
Traveling.
meeting with his family. So it'll be hopefully some good family time for Juan. So pray for him and his family. But we also have a great guest I normally say this evening. We're doing recording in the morning time.
Yeah.
So, but this morning we have a great guest with us, Father Bonaventure Chapman, Dominican from the Dominican House of Studies, recently doctor in philosophy.
Yep, I'm a certified specialist in like ontology, so I can do those kind of surgeries, conceptual surgery, but don't do nothing other than that. It would be dangerous. Yeah, my brother's actually a medical doctor, so he can do like real surgeries. I just do conceptual surgeries.
Like your biological brother?
That's right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a fraternal twin brother.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, he's an anesthesiologist.
Nice.
So he puts people to sleep.
That's the way to go.
Yeah, pain surgeon, all that kind of stuff. So.
You know, the funny thing about anesthesiologists is that they're very often sleeping themselves while their patients are asleep.
It's like is known by like.
Yeah. Because you put them to sleep and then you just sit there and you watch the monitor and...
Yeah.
Yeah, be sure. You can close your eyes for a few minutes. No big deal. All right?
He's basically done with the anesthesia, you could say. Part he works now on mostly pain surgery because of the boringness of that, I suppose. So now he installs a little pump specialty stuff in the spine to be very careful. It's a delicate surgery with his hand, so because if you make a mistake in the spinal cord,
That sounds like
you're okay in a way. That person's not, and then your money is not okay.
Yeah.
You're one sneeze away from a lawsuit.
His
That's
hands
exactly right.
must be adroit.
Look at that good use of word. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
We talked about this word yesterday at breakfast,
Yeah.
and so I'm excited to have an opportunity to use it.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So are you like Doctor Father or is it Father Doctor?
Just father, but I guess it's weird because it's
like
Father Bonaventure Chapman OP, and then sometimes you put PhD after that. But I feel like OP should be that's the kind of important part, and the PhD is just kind of there. So I guess it'd be Father Dr. Bonaventure Chapman OP PhD. But it's like that's just silly. Just
it seems like it would be
fine.
Father Doctor because you
Yeah.
say Saint Pope
Yeah.
John Paul II,
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. But yeah, Father is sufficient.
Very good.
very good.
Very good. So we're going to talk, this is very, like, you understand, like, this is something that we would do. We'd bring a Dominican on to talk about a Franciscan.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, this makes very logical sense,
Well,
right?
Dave's got the Franciscan shirt on today.
I do.
Yes.
It says preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use T-shirts.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yes,
of course,
and that's actually a direct quote,
riffing off of a quote that
he didn't actually say.
He never actually said, but
like most quotes,
like who cares?
Says. Yeah, it's it represents something like him. It's reasonably accurate to his character and what he might have said.
Yeah,
or might have done, this sort of thing.
Actually, that quote or
we hit track 4.
The supposed quote, it really bothers me because it's like, oh really?
Yeah.
Oh, and when necessary, use words. Oh,
you're so holy.
Your actions, your charity has reached such a level. I barely need words.
Yeah. It could be, or you could just, from a philosophical perspective, it is a conditional, and so the antecedent you could just say is always fulfilled. Like, if necessary, use words. It's always necessary.
Yeah.
So
use words.
So it's actually, it's a fine claim. It's a nice part about conditional claims is they're okay. It's like when you talk about, oh, this might be dangerous with people, but let's say like someone has a pet bird or something and it dies, and you're like, oh, what should you say? Is the bird gonna be in heaven? And I say, the correct answer is, if you need that bird to be in heaven to be happy, then of course God's gonna give you that bird.
Yeah.
He'll give you exactly what you need to be happy.
He's not going to give you the bird.
The antecedent will not be fulfilled.
No.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about somebody who may not be familiar to some of our audience, but John Duns Scotus.
Mm-hmm. Blessed John Duns Scotus.
Blessed John Duns Scotus. Yes. But yeah, maybe for those who never heard of the guy before, like what time period are we talking about? Sure. Like he's a Franciscan.
And in the recent ruling about
we'll talk about the decision. Yeah,
yeah.
Exactly.
Was he on the 6 or the 3 side?
He was on the 6 side. Yep, with Clarence Thomas.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, the first. Yeah, that's a good. When you live in the theological world or the medieval Dominican type of world, Scotus. The first analogy is, of course, Duns Scotus, and then you realize, oh, there's Scotus and POTUS. These sort of things. But for most people who don't live in this world, Scotus probably refers to the Supreme Court of the United States, just like. I live at the Dominican House of Studies, which we call DHS. But for most people, DHS is a different kind of thing.
Like not something you want to get involved with.
Yeah, I do think it's accurate, though, in a sense that the Dominican House of Studies is kind of the real Department of Homeland Security. It's kind of attentive to what's actually true in the world and all that. But in any case, so Scotus, when we refer to Scotus, it is his last name, which is something like it's the Scot. So John Duns the Scot or the Scote. He's a Franciscan in the end of the 13th century, lived roughly 1265 until 1308. So if you're checking in on your time scales here, Thomas Aquinas has died in 1272, I think it is, and so he's a generation, you could say, after Thomas Aquinas. But this is the age of the great universities. So Oxford and Paris have been established, and this is the age when theology is the highest science in the universities. That's not true today. And so your highest masters are your masters of sacred theology at that time. And Duns Scotus falls within that tradition. So he's a master at Paris and then at Oxford. So he's spending most of the time, even though we generally think of Franciscans as people that are working the street, poor, help with the poor, this kind of thing. At this time, the two great mendicant orders, the begging orders, the Franciscans and the Dominicans, founded from St. Francis and St. Dominic, they quickly became experts in theology and took on and had chairs. Basically, in Paris, there would be a man who had a priest who had a chair of theology, and then early on they converted to they became a Dominican or Franciscan, and then so the order said, so when he dies, that's our chair. We get to keep that, right?
We'll replace. Yeah, we'll
Exactly.
supply the next guy.
Exactly. Yeah. So Bonaventure and St. Thomas, of course, are an example of this sort of thing, and then it kind of keeps going. Now there are diocesan secular masters, as they're called, but Scotus is a little bit later than St. Thomas. So he's a generation after. So he, didn't live. He overlapped with Thomas, but he wasn't in the same place at all.
So was Scotus? Would he have read Aquinas?
Yeah, this is when if you're a Scotist today in our terms, you have to know Thomas Aquinas because of course Scotus is dealing with Thomas Aquinas. Whereas if you're a Thomist, you might just think I'm just going to stop at Thomas and then not worry about that. So Scotus tend to look a little askance at Thomas and say, like, look, we have to know you and our guy. You just have to know your guy. So he would have read Thomas, but at this point, it's interesting. People forget that there has been time since. So when Scotus is in Paris, say in the 1290, into the 1280s and the 1290s, and then again in the early 1300s, Thomas has kind of faded in the background a little bit. At this point, the secular masters, the diocesan masters, Henry of Ghent and Godfrey of Fontaine, and then one of Thomas's students, Giles of Rome, who was an Augustinian, they have in a sense been the next wave. So Scotus is responding really to these guys after Thomas, although they're responding and developing from Thomas. So it's a great conversation.
They're one downhill.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's a different context because they're dealing with problems that Thomas wasn't particularly dealing with.
Yeah. But certainly he wasn't as famous or well known as he is. Certainly not as he is today. He wasn't
St. Thomas?
Aquinas, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's so in 1277. So not too many years after Thomas died. There's condemnations from Paris. So the Pope asks Bishop Tempier to look into some questions about what was happening at Paris and the teachers. Basically, a version of Aristotelianism, so Western philosophy, that was coming over from the Arabic world that was deterministic and was very concerning. And so they said, well, let's look into this and see what the guys are teaching there. If they teaching the right stuff. It's just curriculum management stuff, standard things. Maybe DEI issues back in the 13th century. And Tempier condemns 219. He offers 219 propositions in 1277, and a number of those propositions are actually from Thomas Aquinas. So Thomas Aquinas falls under this. So at this point, and that's where the Dominicans rally around and get excited about things and save his honor, and it does eventually. It's a complicated history in that time, but at this point, Thomas is not like the common doctor.
Right.
He's one of the greatest among many at this point, but there are a lot of guys vying for how to understand the faith and respond to new Aristotelian pagan philosophy as it's been received. So he's one of the privileged conversation partner, but he's not like the common doctor, I should say, as we conceive of him today since Aeterni Patris. Yeah.
Okay, so we're about to come up on our break, but I guess there's the friction, at least in today's world. Is there a friction? Is the friction as apparent back then as what it is today from the Scotus and Aquinas? Does that make sense? The question.
Think about it.
Okay. And then we'll answer on the other side of the break. Okay, we're here with Father Bonaventure Chapman, a Dominican from the Dominican House of Studies. We'll be right back. Wait for this coffee to kick in. Mine does not seem to be moving at the same pace as what I would like it to be. That was a easy question that I just could not get out. I apologize.
You're good. You're fine.
Got a few listeners this morning.
Oh, good.
All right. Jim, you're one of them, though.
It may be just us. Now, Ed's on I-40 heading to Elk City right now. So
oh, cool.
All right.
In his truck.
Okay, we ready?
Well, drive safe, Ed.
Yeah. Safety first. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles, here with Adam Minahan, our special guest, Father Bonaventure Chapman. Father Dr. Bonaventure Chapman, OP PhD.
Yeah, that's right.
Could be a rapper name almost.
Oh.
OP PhD.
One of my classmates used to do a lot of rap. Used to rap the Athanasian Creed and such.
I want to hear it. That sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah, you'd think so.
I saw a guy recently rapping Dr. Seuss, and it was legit.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
It was pretty good. So I want to back up. Adam, you asked a question about friction between Scotus and Aquinas.
Yeah.
But I think we should finish saying who this guy is before we get
that's a good idea.
Okay, there's this dude who's the Scot.
Yeah.
His name
John.
His name is Brown, like Dunn. right?
Yeah, no, Dunce is, I think, a place in Scotland.
Wait, is it Dunce?
Dunce, yeah.
Oh, I thought you
like
said
Dunce Cap.
I thought you said Dun, like
no,
Dun.
It's like John Dunn.
Duns.
Yes,
Not
okay.
John Dunn, but John Dunce Scotus.
I'd probably, if it was personal preference, I'd probably rather be Dun than Dunce.
Yeah.
But you don't
you
don't get to choose all things in life. You sometimes you just get the cards you got.
Yeah, and the dunce cap, I mean, it comes from Duns Scotus.
It does?
He used to wear a funny cap. And
It literally comes from him.
Well, I mean, he didn't wear the funny wizard cap, but the idea of putting on a dunce cap is as far as I can tell, the tradition is it comes from, you go sit in the, put on the dunce cap because it didn't like Scotus, and so this was a kind of thing to like quiet him up over there. I think that's if people could fact check that, but that's the story I've been told.
You know what?
And
for
that's
right
plausible.
now, we're going with it.
Yeah,
That's fine. Exactly. This is how podcasting goes.
Yeah, go get your own podcast if you don't like it.
Yeah, exactly. Just swing out boldly. Don't worry, no one's reading the comments, so you can.
yeah, we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So he's a Franciscan theologian. He spends time in Oxford studying there. Then goes to Paris. Starts in Paris. He's a master there. Does his at this time to be a master, you're commenting on Peter Lombard's sentences. So it's a collection of basically theological propositions from Augustine largely and the tradition, and then you're just writing kind of large commentaries on this. And that's how you prove that you're a master, and you keep working on this through your careers. You keep lecturing on these kind of sentences in a way that today we might lecture on the Summa Theologiae. Right? So St. Thomas is a great work. That wasn't used until about the 1500s. The sentences, even after Thomas wrote the Summa, the sentences are still the main text. These 4 books of the sentences that everyone kind of comments, and as everyone comments on, it's a nice kind of basic text. It's like in the Protestant world, I guess, like using the Bible. And I'm not saying in the Catholic world, like they replace the Bible with the sentences, but it has the same sense. Like this was if you're doing theology, you're meant to be commenting on these books, and they cover the sacraments, God, the Trinity, creation, redemption, human, all that stuff. So he's writing all that. He's teaching Oxford on that, and then he finishes his career in Paris, comes back, and he's he dies relatively young. No poison or anything. He just dies. People did. And then
it still happens to this day, believe it or not.
Exactly. It's incredible. Yeah. And so but within the school, it's again with Thomas, in a sense, he's special. St. Thomas is special because of the part of the condemnations. The Dominicans just rally around him, and basically Dominican and Thomism becomes kind of conflated sometimes. Like it's, if you're a Dominican, you're obviously a Thomist. If you're a Thomist, you're obviously, sort of thing. These are connected. So there's only one. I mean, there's Albert the Great, Thomas's teacher, but Albertine Thomism is not as, they rallied around Thomas in its way. Whereas the Franciscan school, I mean, St. Bonaventure was, of course, Thomas's contemporary. He was a great master. And then Scotus shows up. Peter John O'Leary is right before Scotus. And then William of Ockham. Your names, people know. If people know Occam's razor, you don't multiply things beyond necessity. Aristotle says the same thing. But Occam, it's popularized with Occam. He's a Franciscan master as well. And so there are more Franciscans don't have like a single master in their theology. They have very different. So even though Bonaventure, Scotus, and Occam have similarities, which we might want to get into about the difference between Franciscan emphases and, say, Dominican emphases, or, so not just Scotus versus Thomist emphases, but these broader issues, yet they're still very different on a number of things. So there's less coherence or cohesion, you could say, to the Franciscan intellectual tradition.
Less trial.
And it's less, exactly. Yeah.
The adhesion comes from trial.
Adhesion comes from trial.
Yeah, trial is just good for you, basically all the way around.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and for Dominicans, because of the issues of Thomas, they just circled the wagons, and so this became this kind of we protect our guy at all costs. Yeah. And Franciscans, they were more free to. Well, Franciscans, there's only one Dominican order. Franciscans, they
have a lot of
they spread around, so it's all recapitulated.
So what did Scotus do, or what did he write that makes him significant?
So that's a good, if people know about Scotus, perhaps what he's most significant about for Catholics is his defense of the Immaculate Conception. So this is one of those things where Dominicans lost, and so Thomas lost on this one, and Scotus won on this one, because Scotus argues that Mary is immaculately conceived, and he's kind of the doctor of the Immaculate Conception in this way. People have said this before. It's not like the Immaculate Conception was impossible, but he's the one who starts to produce really theological arguments that end up being used into the decree itself. Although Dominicans are known for saying we were wrong for the right reasons on the Immaculate Conception, and the Franciscans were right, but for the wrong reasons. It's not that simple, but Dominicans were very concerned about how the Immaculate Conception fit in with Christ saving everyone. So how could obviously Christ has to save every human being. If you're saved, you have to be saved by Christ's grace. So if Mary's conceived immaculately, like without sin at all, not just like immediate. Thomas thinks that's immediate kind of sanctification, but there's at least a moment, you could say, not temporally, that she's conceived with sin, but then immediately sanctified in the womb. But so they thought because Christ has to save, his redemption has to be good for Mary. It's not like Mary gets a free pass. And so Scotus' argument is, Scotus is a really deep, dense philosophical thinker, as he says that the order of love is different than the order of time. So God can redeem Mary by Christ's merit that he will do, because God sees all things in the same time. And because he can do that, Scotus says, is it fitting that he does that? Theologians, oftentimes you don't get demonstrations, particular proofs, but you get is something fitting.
Yeah.
And he says, is it fitting that Mary, being the mother of God in the flesh, would be preserved in this way? He could do it. Is it fitting that he gives honor in this way? It's fitting that way. Therefore, we ought to err on the side of piety in this way. And so he defends arguments why it's not a problem because of his notion of temporality. And then he says, are there good reasons to think this is the case? And he gives the fittingness arguments. And that ends up swaying, at least in some ways, sways the church. Although if you notice in the decree about it, when it comes out in 1850, it does have kind of a Dominican line about like in virtue of the merits of Christ. So it's in there.
Right. Yeah.
It's in there. Yeah.
So
they would know that about Scotus is the Immaculate Conception.
Was Scotus arguing Mary was immaculately conceived, or just arguing for her Immaculate Conception? Once again, from a fittingness.
Yeah, he was arguing for her Immaculate Conception.
So he wasn't saying absolutely she had to be immaculately conceived, because I think it's correct, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Aquinas doesn't say she wasn't. He just says that it wasn't necessary. It wasn't requirement. Maybe
there's a dispute on this with Aquinas. It seems like sometimes he almost offers it as it could happen, or it's possible, or it did happen. His general, it seems like, at least the text, the stable text, it seems like he says, this is really, there's always a possibility, but this is really not, we should not support this.
It's not his opinion.
It's not his opinion, exactly. Whereas Scotus, this is his opinion. He thinks this is right.
Is that also because he's not sure when the soul actually unites with the body? Like
these guys would have been the same on roughly on that.
Okay.
These guys would have been the same on they're roughly following the standard Aristotelian line on that. They would have been
the quickening.
Yeah, something like that. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So Scotus is not, once again, saying she had to be immaculately conceived, but she just
this is a really good point. There's almost nothing for Scotus that had to be done, which we would conceive too. But interesting in the context, so the condemnations were really against the idea that God had to do certain things. So from the Arabic world, God's creation has a sort of necessity to it, from at least the Arabic world translation of Aristotle's stuff, so that God becomes this first mover of necessity, and that his choice are all necessity. So Scotus and the Franciscans are responding to claims of God being forced to do anything, like creation just had to happen. He had to have dissemination. And these guys are all saying, no, it's not. It's a free choice. God is free in doing this choice. So Scotus emphasizes freedom, not only in God, but of course in us too, because these guys are pounding against a strong determinism in God and also in humans. So Scotus, there's literally nothing. I mean, Scotus is going to make some radical claims in general about God's freedom and even our freedom. But it's in the context of trying to fight off, at that time, so in the 1290s and the 1300s, fighting off this intellectual deterministic kind of move of these pure Aristotelians called radical Aristotelians. That's a different context than, say, Thomas is working in. He's not worried about in that same way. So Scotus cares a lot about the freedom of God and the freedom of man in a way that is not as explicit in some of the early guys, just because they're not having to make it as explicit. But they would, of course, agree. Yeah, exactly.
So I think this is a good time to come back to your question, Adam.
Okay.
About some of the major friction.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's not a good time.
We'll be back.
But this time, for sure.
This time.
After the break, we will come back to it.
Yes.
Almost assuredly.
Yeah.
Squirrel!
This is the Catholic Man Show with Adam Minahan and David Niles. We'll be right back.
Very good.
Hey, there's 4 comments on our Facebook Live feed.
They're all Jim.
I'm trying to wake everybody up.
Okay.
All right, let's roll.
I'm ready. Stand by.
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. We're going to the Holy Land. We're doing it right after Easter this coming year.
Next year.
Yeah.
This coming year, I guess.
Is also correct.
I think that's a slightly more confusing way to say it, but I'll allow it.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome. 2025.
Yeah.
No.
2024.
2024.
Just
right after
keeping everybody
Easter.
on their toes here.
You're gonna bring your wife.
I'm bringing my wife.
Jim's coming, and Kathy's coming.
Jim and Kathy are coming.
I think Haley's coming as well.
You've been to the Holy Land,
I
Father?
have not.
Mm.
Yeah. Is this your first times?
Yes. Oh, can't wait.
Fantastic.
And we also have we have locked in our chaplain,
Yes.
which we've been.
I think you should announce it.
Okay. So you ready for this? I think you know the guy.
I bet you do.
Bet you know him.
I bet you do know him. Do you know who it is?
No.
Father Patrick Briscoe.
Oh, you guys. Third choice, huh? Okay. Oh, that's
Yeah,
great. That's
so,
great. He's a classmate of mine. Wonderful.
That's right.
Yeah, editor over at OSV, charge of news. All that. Dominican lives at the house studies with me. So
Yeah.
he's great.
So we're really pumped to go with him to the Holy Land. It's gonna be awesome. So selectinternationaltours.com/Catholic Man Show. Come with us.
Come get holy with us.
Yeah.
In the land of holiness.
So.
Yeah.
I just made that up just now.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
TN.
Yeah, trademark.
And then Jim, what else? The store.
It's Christmas time, so
It's almost no, it's not. It's not almost
Christmas in
time.
July?
Christmas in July.
Okay.
Go check out CatholicManShow.com/store. You can get like a hat like this.
Oh.
Check that out.
Yeah.
Are Dominicans allowed to wear hats?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll give you a hat. Do you wear hats?
No.
We'll give you something else.
That's great.
So we're here with Father Bonaventure talking about John Duns Scotus. So
the rub.
Yes, we're the rub.
The
Yes,
rub.
We're getting to like where is this friction?
Yeah, this is great. This is
And
great.
you made it sound like that it was like kind of only one way. That it kind of like almost like the Eastern Christianity and Catholicism. It seems like it's only one way.
Like one people disagreeing with the other people, and the other people are like, "Hey, it's cool,
come on.
man." I mean, like,
good.
Yeah.
don't worry about it.
It is, well, so I guess the difference between like a Scotus historically, and we should switch to Scotism.
Yeah.
I just mean, so maybe like Scotus historically on Thomas historically or not, Scotus is dealing with a different problem sets, we could say, and yet they do so. Scotism and Thomism, and the development from these kind of schools of thought, there is a tension. You could say there's a tension here, or at least there's different emphases. And I think it's actually it's a productive tension, as you know. It's good to have people kind of pushing back on things.
Yeah.
And I see it as rooted in actually the Dominican and the Franciscan kind of charisms and emphases, and actually what St. Dominic focused on and what St. Francis focused on. And so it's not surprising to me that there should be these kind of this sort of generative tension, you could say, to this.
Oh, that's a good term. I like that.
Yeah, that's good. And so I would say that and let me play it out in this way, is for Dominicans, the intellect and faith and knowledge kind of they're the primary things.
More focused on anyway.
More focused because the primary
Emphasis,
aspect, you could say, emphasis something. So like virtue, we think of Dominicans, you think of the virtue of faith. St. Thomas at the end of his life writes a little compendium of theology. People have probably seen this thing, the compendium. And he's going to treat faith, hope, and charity. He does faith, does like 2 chapters of hope, and then it's done. I'm done with this. Which is kind of like, it makes clear the kind of focus on the faith. Our motto is Veritas, and truth is in the intellect.
Yeah.
So we care a lot about, and we always talk about, you can't love what you don't know, sort of thing. And there's this, and then the beatific vision, of course, is the kind of big. So like Thomas is known for this sort of stuff. So Dominicans tend to focus on the powers of knowing. Thomas is the angelic doctor because of his penetrating insight into things. The Franciscans, you could say, are more on the side of loving. They come less, not the intellect, but they focus on the will, not to exclusion of the intellect. Just like, for instance, Thomas doesn't say will doesn't matter, right? But the Franciscans tend to be working on the will side of things. They tend to be working on loving, this sort of thing, and their key virtue, you could say, is charity. So that this is the love of God that focuses all things. And in a sense, I was thinking about this with a loved one. These are 2 aspects that you want to have both of these things. You want to, when you have a loved one, I suspect you want to see their face, his or her face, right? You want to hold, you hold someone, and then you want to embrace, to unite. But it's a back and like you don't just always hug your wife, I suppose. You want to look at her too, right? You want to see her, the face. So you want to know her, but then you want to love her, sort of thing. We do this, and it's back and forth.
Yeah.
And I think the Franciscans and Dominicans are helpful in pointing both these things, and that, in a sense, Thomism and Scotism are related to and stem from these kind of differences. So you're going to see tensions with how Scotists conceive of God's freedom with, more importantly, man's freedom and things, versus a Dominican conception of this. For if you're a Dominican, you get really scared that Scotists care a lot about freedom. In fact, it'd make it too much. In fact, it sounds almost like modern conceptions of freedom. In fact, if you're really nasty, you could blame Scotus for modernity. This happens. Right. Whereas if you're a Scotist, you look at Dominicans, you think, you guys, you're kind of determinists. You're kind of you don't believe in freedom. Your morality is set for this world, not for the next, because you care about happiness in this life. And you mentioned beatitude, but you really mean the virtues, and the virtues are from Aristotle, and Aristotle's about full functioning living in this life, and Aristotle doesn't recognize the saints. He has no understanding of saintly sacrifice. So guys are kind of pagan determinists. You're Spinozists, right? So
I think that would be an unfair argument, because even though Aristotle talks about the virtues aren't from Aristotle, right?
Right. Macrobius, of course, but Aristotle is the man of virtue on this.
Certainly,
and it sets up the but like and Aristotle doesn't have a good account of the will. Really, it's only St. Augustine who brings in the will to Western thought. So you might, for Aristotle, the will doesn't really show up. Personality doesn't show up. Here's one more distinction: the intellect cares about universals. So the intellect cares about what is something. It's this. Whereas love seems to care more about particulars. You love something particular. And for Dominicans, we tend to focus on, and Thomism tends to focus on universal aspects of things, right? That scientific thing, more abstract things. Whereas Scotists are going to care about, there's everything in the fact for Scotus is an individual and is essentially an individual in this way. So he has a very strong claim to particularity as opposed to universality. Now, they have to be both, but it's a question of the emphasis on that. And I think that's because, again, Scotus is focused so much on loving, and you love particular things where you know universals, and particulars through experience of abstract universals in our sense. But you love, I love pies. You love pies, individual pies, but like pie as a form, this kind of thing. No, you love particulars. And so Scotus focuses on, and you might, too much so, you might think, but you might say the Dominican side, too little so, that kind of stuff. So
I'm just over here thinking, like,
here.
I do love individual pies, but I have eros for pie.
Just pie. Yeah. 3.14159. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that sets up at least the kind of the framework, and if you want it, we can go in and talk about specifics.
Yeah. So Aquinas, his notion of the person is that the intellect knows things, and that the intellect informs the will.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas Scotus is suggesting that the will isn't necessarily something that's like on the leash of the intellect. It's free to do its own thing, apart from.
Well, this is a good point.
Knowing.
So this is a good point between and people, your listeners might be familiar. If they're not familiar, it's a good word for them. In difference between intellectualists and voluntarists. So voluntarism is volos, from the vole, the will, so focus on the will, and then intellectualism is, of course, the intellect. So to intellectus, focus on the intellect. So basically, when in acting virtuously or morally, you're acting morally, is it reason that determines what you ought to do, or is it the will that determines what you ought to do? Like, which one do we focus on? Thomas, following Aristotle, his conception generally is that reason gives you decide what is the good in the situation. You do practical judgment. You know, what's my end, this sort of stuff, and then the will kind of just follows along with that. So if there is error, if there's sin, it's in the judgment, the practical judgment. You've made a mistake, and you've thought this was good for you, but it wasn't really good for you. You made a mistake. And so your will just follows the practical judgment. It's in a sense necessitated by, right? As you can see where this is the worried about why the condemnations come down. And that's not, Aquinas doesn't necessarily say this, but his people following him do, Godfrey of Fontaines. But on Scotus' side, he says, fight off this, wait a minute, it's not the intellect that makes the judgment is wrong, and therefore your sin is based upon like an error, a mathematical mistake. It's that you, through your will, you choose not to follow the right decision in that way. So he focuses on the fact that error has to be for sin, or goodness has to be in choosing the right thing, not as choosing just isn't like a follow through of good, good thinking. All right, now you chose something well. So he focused on that aspect of it, which gives a different coloring, you could say, to the moral act.
Because a mistake is not a sin. If you just intellectualize, if you think about it wrong, and you tried to make the right choice, but you were just wrong, that wouldn't be a sin.
No, you have to have full knowledge that you've made a sin. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Okay. This is Catholic Man Show. Adam Minhan and David Niles here with Father Bonaventure. We'll be right back.
All right. Welcome back. So, we just pick up right there.
Yeah.
I dig.
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles, here with Adam Minahan, Father Bonaventure Chapman, Dominican House of Studies. We're going commercial free for the rest of the show.
Oh, yes.
How about that?
Well,
pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's the fourth segment, so yes.
Commercial free from here on out.
Hold your hats, which you've bought from the Catholic Man Show.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, so I think that was a good distinction to be made. So we got to have breakfast yesterday morning. We talked all about this, and I've kind of gone back and forth in my mind. At first, I was like, no, it has to be the intellect, has to be like the primary. And then, like, since then, I've kind of like, well, maybe it's not. And then at the end, I arrived. It's like, you know what? It's just both. It's and this is something from what you said. It's like, well, no. Your faculties don't commit sins, people do.
Yeah. And we say faculties, we mean like the faculty of the intellect, so the capacity of the intellect, and the faculty of the will. So it's easy, and this is, if you read the literature and stuff, almost you have to make this a little, when you're talking about what's called faculty psychology. The soul's account is made up of these faculties of feeling, imagination, sensation, willing, intellect, all this. You always put a little rider on the start that says, now I'm going to speak as if the faculty is doing something and choosing and knowing. It doesn't. The person knows this. So, but just let you know. And then you go ahead and talk as if this because it's just too complicated to say, well, we know through, but technically, yes, the person is the one, the agent, the actor is this. And we do through these faculties. And so in a sense, it's not like, you can get the sense of, if you're from Scotus, and your worry might be, well, if the will gets to choose whatever it wants, it's got this little mind of itself, and it says, I don't like that. You said I should do this, but I'm not going to do that. Then who's in charge of? So you've got this thing in you that's the will. Well, who
governs that?
How do you relate to that exactly? Right. Or the intellect. It's less clear because we tend to associate with the intellect. But you could think like there's this little guy that just a silly mathematician who does stuff, and I just have to follow him whatever he says.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy. No, it's you through your. So these are powers. The faculty is of course facultas, so it has kind of power sense to it. These are ways that our soul acts, and yes, both are actually necessary. So both Thomas and Scotus think that you have to have, and Thomism and Scotism, so you have to have, when you act morally, you have to have both intellect and will functioning, right? We know this from the definition of sin. You just have to know it and will it, and if it's mortal sin, it has to be grave matter. So you need both of these things. I think what these guys are doing, and it's important to remember the historical context, is Thomas is just working on what it means to know and think about, actually to reason to good action and such. Whereas Scotus is basically tasked, as all the theologians were at that time, with trying to fight off determinism. And the intellectual's account that, hey, if I've made the right judgment, as you say, just a mathematical or whatever, this is a good, here it is, I should do goods, therefore I should choose this. Well, that's just you could do a practical syllogism as a demonstration. It's not like there's no choice there. It just follows one premise from the other, right? It's a mathematical proof.
Yeah.
And then so choice is respondent to that. So, but where's the freedom? Because we have to be free. Otherwise, well, it's traditionally conceived, at least in the Christians, and I would say the correct understanding, that if there's no freedom in some sense, then you can't be held responsible. If your kid does something wrong, but they didn't have ability not to do something wrong, you don't blame them. It's like your kid, you have a small child or something, and you say, oh my gosh, I've got this 100-pound weight, this 100-pound jar here. It's very delicate. I'm gonna give it to my daughter Anna.
Yeah.
And she can't hold it.
Right.
And she drops it, and you're like, you're grounded for life.
How dare you?
Yeah. So it's like, it's just necessary based upon the conditions that she's going to drop this thing, unless it's a miracle. And you might think in the same way, if it's just the intellect, if the will just follows the intellect, it's whatever the judgment is, and doesn't have, you could say, the choice, and it's you having the choice with your will, but we speak again about the will having the choice, then there's no freedom there. That's the concern. That was the concern, that Thomas's account, at least when it was radicalized, led to this notion of intellectual determinism in God, because God just sees the best possible thing, and therefore he has to do something. He's not free to create and love. There's no love in that. And we, our intellects, insofar as they grasp things, and the will just follows whatever judgment is, well, there was no freedom in that. So Scotus and the Franciscans are fighting back on the other side and saying, no, the intellect presents, but you have freedom to choose against even what you judge to be the best, right?
Yeah. And I do think that there's certainly, like, I come into this conversation with a notion that the intellect is superior or primary. And I think part of that is because I associate intellect with personhood. Okay, yep. Because animals
rational.
Have exactly. The angels, well, they're pure intellect.
Yes.
Okay, but they also have a will.
Right.
Okay, so they're not pure intellect. If they also, I mean,
we tend to it's very important. We tend to
they're not corporal. That's what we mean.
And when we talk about rational animals, we're rational animals and they're rational spirits, and we tend to think rational as in reason means
Yes,
intellect only.
right.
But of course, the will, even for
They have a rational will.
yeah, but it's called a rational appetite.
Uh-huh.
So we have a rational, and just like there are like animals have some kind of, they don't have cognitive ability, but they have some kind of ways of judging and measuring estimative powers. And we just tend to think that that's not even close to the intellects or whatever. It's the same thing with their desires. We tend to think, well, they have wills. No, not a free will. They
Right.
don't have it.
Right.
Right. They act on instinct. We have that. They have estimative powers in the sense of like sizing things up, But it's not the intellect. It can't abstract, and it's not the will because it can't freely choose. But you're right. We tend to, because of how we think of rational and being reason, we immediately think, well, actually, intellect and knowledge is what really makes us distinct.
And that's personhood almost. And so it's like,
yeah.
I think I kind of have to remember that, no, there's more. I'm more than just an intellect.
And in fact, you might even think that like what makes you, and this with the Franciscan tradition, which I think might be, I'm very desirous of it, in that I think loving is what, charity is the thing we're going to have.
Yeah.
It's the thing that, and that freedom and moral action is more human than calculation and abstract knowledge, so that the saint and the lover of God is more valuable and more human than just the knower, you could say, and the pure philosopher of God. So that actually, even though we think, associate immediately that reason is, an intellect is what we are as a human, you might actually be, better to say is we're more really lovers, rational lovers, than just rational knowers, you could say.
Yeah, you're right. I think that is a better distinction when you compare us to the animals. Okay, it's like, oh, well, we're rational. But, well, more importantly, we're lovers.
Yeah, we are, and this is the thing, describe some objects you describe functionally, like what they do. So like, Hoover in England, a sweeper is a Hoover, and you hoover with it. What's that thing you open cans with? We call it a can opener. We sometimes describe things as what they do.
Yeah.
And for us, we often talk, we're rational animals or featherless bipeds. But really, we're knowers and lovers. Like that's, and we're the things that we're embodied knowers and lovers. That's the only thing in the world, because angels aren't embodied. They're knowers and lovers, but not embodied. God is.
Some of them have feathers, though. I've seen the pictures.
That's the thing. Some look like, the funny part is angels. Whenever we depict angels, I like the little cherubs, like they're little like sweet children. They're like these. Angels are not sweet children. They're like the most powerful, free, and rational things. And that's just a little child's like me.
I wonder how they feel about that, because I think
they don't feel
if
anything.
you were to see one, you're right.
What they think about that.
What they intellect about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think if we were to see one, if hypothetically, I know you can't see one because they don't.
They can manifest themselves.
If we could,
sand,
whatever it is that you do in heaven,
I
think that they would be terrifying,
Well, biblically, that's what happens. Every time an angel comes in, everybody's scared to death.
Yeah, there's a beautiful. I don't know if you know this man. I think it's Henry Tanner. He has Annunciation. It's really because the Annunciation is a classic where you're going to depict angels. And Fra Angelico has beautiful ones, but my favorite I think is I think it's Henry Tanner. He's a Catholic artist. This Annunciation is in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And it's beautiful because it's Mary sitting in a bed. It's sitting by her bedside or something, and the angel is just this bright shaft of light, a bit like these lights back here. It has this preternatural, supernatural feel to it. It's just this flaming light, but not in like a silly way, in a real. And you have this cool experience of it. You look and you say, well, "That can't be an angel. It doesn't have wings and whatever." And it's one of those. Well. It could be just as much that. In fact, that might be.
It's probably a better.
It's a better representation.
Conception of it. Anyway,
yeah, exactly. So I think that's right. Yeah.
So I have a question though, to go back to, because it seems like for the intellectualists, I guess, or the Thomist idea, if like the syllogism, like they can't choose wrong, right? It's almost like because it's a mathematical equation.
The error would be you would have made an error in the logic, the practical syllogism we call it. So instead of the theoretical syllogism, a mathematical syllogism would be theoretical. Mathematics doesn't have feeling, but the practical syllogism, what to do. Your error would be in making an error of judgment in there. That your will then, because your will ratifies that. That's the standard claim. Again,
so you couldn't like choose like a a lower good over a higher good necessarily, unless
you
it's just unless you
exactly. That's the thing, is that on the intellectualist account, which makes it sound like necessaritan, is because you can only choose in what you know, and so you must have made a mistake, but you think it's the best. And we do find this all the time, right? We do think, hey, apparent good, I think this is good, but it turns out to be wrong about that. That is our experience, but not always.
Right. Okay, so we're running out of time on the radio. Go check us out at thecatholicmanshow.com. We're going to continue this conversation with Father Bonaventure Chapman. I think you're even going to hang out with us for another episode.
That's true.
We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass.
And cheers to Jesus.
Cheers. Okay, so if from the Thomist perspective, so you can only choose if you're choosing a lesser good over a higher good. It's only because it's a distortion of understanding.
Because you think it's a higher good.
You think it's a higher good when it's not truly.
Exactly.
But if it's if you're from a Scotus point of view, you actually have the intellect. You reasoned it out. 2 + 2 = 4, but then you have your will can actually choose not 4 but 5.
Well, it can't choose it. So this is
it can desire 5.
It desires all, we all desire, it responds to the goods, and so it can say, I desire this, so it is good that it would be good for me to eat 3 hamburgers or whatever in a day. It'd also be a good in a way for me to eat 5 hamburgers in a day. And the question is, the practical syllogisms say, well, bringing all the kind of things, conditions of sickness and all this kind of stuff, this is the better good is this sort of thing, right? And then the better good is to eat 3 instead of 5. Okay, say that's true, and say that also tracks reality, right? So you've made the right decisions on that, and then so you've made the right syllogism, and then your decision is based on that's the better one, therefore, sort of thing. Whereas Scotus says, I need the will. There has to be some freedom through the will. Because freedom of the intellect the intellect really isn't free. I'm free, and my choices are free, but like my reasoning really, it's weird. Freedom seems the wrong category to describe the reasoning process. So Scotus says, it must be the case that I can reason to this conclusion. It'd be better for me to have 3 than 5. That's better. All things considered. But it is still good for me to have 5 under some aspects, right? But I know it's not the best. But I'm going to choose that. I have the power to choose against my better judgment in this way. He has this. Now, of course, this is a phenomenological experiment. This is what we kind of do experience. And it sounds like I'm basically saying, well, I mean, you have to be a Scotist if you believe that you know you ought not to do this, but you choose to do this otherwise. No, Thomas have an account of how you explain this thing. It's about how the apparent good appears under a particular way because of the passions, and in the moment of choice, this kind of stuff. Okay, so because you can waffle on some things too. You might think, it's better than this. So Thomas does have an account of, it's not like Thomas can't account for the phenomenology, our experience of like, I know I should tell the truth here, but not going to, this sort of thing. So in some ways, there's an experience of what it is to choose wrong or choose well. And then you have 2 kind of, let's peel back layers, deeper. And eventually, Thomas and Scotus carry on for a while, but eventually there's this final divergence at some point when Thomas says, well, look, at the end of the day, the error made is in your judgment. You somehow decided to yourself that this was the true good. Right here. And the Scotus says...
knowing better.
Yeah, exactly. And the Scotus says, at the end of the day, it's got to be the will that makes the mistake. The fault is in the will. It's got to be through the will that you make your mistake. It's not in the intellect. It can be. You can make mistakes about that. But at the end of the day, you're blameworthy because you've used your freedom poorly, not because you've used your intellect poorly.
See, now I think that's what I think. Because, like, if you get a math problem wrong, it's not a sin, right?
Yeah, unless you ought to get it right or something.
Unless you, well...
But see, here's a good point. And so this is what... And so here,
I might leave this conversation confused, but it's okay. I'll think about it.
Yeah. No, it's good. I'm gonna again sound like Scotus sounds really good. Sounds like there's something about this. It's totally right. But you might think, oh no, This is just the distinction between is and oughts, a distinction between like what fact claims and value claims. And you think, oh no, wait a minute. Scotus is keeping the intellect and the will together, but the will's just kind of sliding off. It's the power that's kind of got its own little autonomy. It is a self-mover. It doesn't just take orders from the intellect, but it takes information from the intellect, and then through the will. Well, as we get further and further away, all of a sudden you have, there's facts out there, but moral decisions have nothing to do with descriptive ises. They're about oughts. And so don't bring me your natural law argument about what human nature is, because that doesn't have anything to do with moral claims about the will and choosing. That's in freedom, and that's based upon non-descriptive theoretical claims. And then you might go, let me grab Thomas again. Let me try to bring back the error, maybe because, it could be that in abortion, for instance, you've just made an error about what that thing is. We're always banging on about, hey, don't call it a fetus, call it a human being.
Yeah.
And you could say, who cares? That's a theoretical claim. Morality is based in the will. And that's what Scotus. And you're like, oh no. So you see, this is why I think, again, what I said, we individuals, persons, are both knowers and lovers. Now, God's simple, so knowing and loving for him are, of course, the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But anything other than God is not simple, it's complex. And this is where, for us, I think, the rubber hits the road, that we are complex in this way, that we are both knowers and lovers, and there is this ununifiable tension. Is and oughts are different kind of things. That is something. I ought to do something. But at the same time, we want to keep them together and related to each other, and telling that story is the tricky part. And that's where a Thomist is going to say, yeah, I want to keep it close and go from this angle. And the Scotus is going to say, I want to go from this angle. But the important is they're not identical. And the other important part is they're not separate. So I think that's why the Scotus and the Thomist tradition both are necessary as kind of two lungs, you could say, to remind us, because we're both knowers and lovers. And when you emphasize one, it's just like if I look to the left, I'm necessarily not looking to the right. If I'm talking to you, Dave, I'm necessarily not talking to Adam at the moment. I've got to switch back and forth because of, silly space. It's in the same way when I talk about the knowledge and focus on the intellect, I'm going to necessarily kind of be just taking my eye off for a second on the will. If I focus on the will, I'm going to be taking my eye off just a second off the intellect. So together, this factors out, by the way, in a beautiful tradition. On the Dominican the feast of St. Dominic, traditionally, Franciscans come and preached in the Dominican convents. So the tradition goes way back. And then on the feast of Holy Father, and then we call Holy Father Dominic, and we call Holy Father Francis as well. And so even though he was a deacon, but Holy Father in the sense of revered founder. And so on his feast day, October 4th, Dominicans will go out and preach to the Franciscans about Francis. So on St. Dominic's Day, Franciscans will come and preach to us about Dominic. And on Francis' Day, we'll go preach to them about Francis. And I think that to me is
that's really great.
It's beautiful because it reminds us that actually we need both,
and you're
knowing, loving, and we're responding to each other,
and fostering piety for each other's founders.
Exactly. Well, Dante, I was talking to you. Think about this, Adam. Dante has this in the Paradiso. Of course, it's Saint Thomas who introduces. We didn't fact check this, but I think it's right. Saint Thomas introduces Francis to us, and Saint Bonaventure introduces Saint Dominic to us.
Oh, really?
Because you have it even incarnated in that kind of the poetic form there.
Okay.
But I think there's something so, and you say, well, what about the Jesuits? Leave them alone. But I think I think there's something to my mind why so we can make the tensions between Thomas, Scotus, and all this. But I think it's hard work to keep together both of them. But I think they're necessary to both keep in there because they're bringing out different aspects that are both true, and we can miss the forest for the trees by focusing on a specific. And there's plenty of differences. We could go into this stuff, but particularly on the will and the intellect and how that relates, intellectualism versus voluntarism. I think if you focus too much on intellectualism, you can fall into determinism, if you focus too much on the voluntarism, then you can fall into like a radical freedom kind of thing. But rather, if these guys, if Dominicans and Franciscans kind of keep just kind of working with each other, as they did in Paris, and these masters, when they'd have the two of chairs working with each other, then that's where that generative tension comes in. Because in our own lives, we're knowers and lovers, and we're trying to love better what we know and know better what we love. And it's always holding, looking at the face, embracing.
Yeah.
Holding, embracing. It's a dynamic in and out movement. I just think that's it's necessary to have both, you know?
Yeah, I have a desire, I can feel in myself, to put things in nice boxes, you know, to say, okay, where do, you know, like, I committed a sin. Where does it, like, who can I blame for this? Was it my will? Was it my intellect? Was it my fill in the blank, you know?
Yep.
I want to
passions,
have
whatever. Yeah.
I always blame my passions.
They're generally they're generally the issue. Yeah.
Right or wrong, that's what I do. But you know, I want to be able to put it in a neat box. But I think we just have to remember, like what we said already, is that we're persons. Persons commit sins.
Yes.
You know, so it's sort of like a person gives birth to a person, not a nature, right? Like,
yep.
Christ wasn't born from Mary's human nature. Christ was born from a human person, right? And that's
the centrality of persons. And I think this is maybe there's another point. But I mean, I don't know if we have another 5 hours to do, but
we do.
Yeah. I mean, so Scotus and the Franciscan tradition brings this kind of person aspect of it. This is why, since you see this with Francis, he loves particular things, but he loves the creche. He's the first one that sets the nativity because he loves this kind of he's the master of the incarnation. Right, and so for him, it's about God becoming a human. You know, I'm sorry, he's not a human person; he's a divine person. But you know,
taking on a human nature.
Yeah, taking on a human nature. He's a human being. You know, it depends how you kind of.
You have to be very careful.
There's a lot. Look, there's minefields. This is Scylla and Charybdis, but they're very close this time.
I basically never talk about the Trinity.
Yeah. That's okay. That's just 1 + 1 = 1. So yeah, but no, I think person natures are they are distinct. But and you want to be careful with this. But like Francis cares about that little baby. He cares about, you know, whereas say Dominic cares about. I mean, he cares about all these things too. But Dominic has this like he's reflecting, contemplating on God, and for the beatific, he's aiming for this sort of thing. He has this. Whereas Francis has it like, give me this baby who is God, this sort of thing. And the Franciscan emphasis on the particularity and the personhood. I mean, Scotus brings this out so clearly, much clearly, I think, than Thomas does, about the individuality of the person. Again, you can focus too much on the individuality, but his emphasis on that you are unique. Scotus has a real way to say that's extremely robust, whereas a Thomist, it's not quite as, you could say, robust in that way. But I think that stems again from Scotus just trying to be faithful to Francis in a way that Thomas is being faithful to Dominic. They're both beautiful.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this may sound like a pejorative, but it's not. But it's.
I'm excited.
But it sounds almost like that. Like the Thomist aspect is like the idea of like a masculine idea, right? Because you're thinking about universals. Like
this is sexist. I already know.
But the Franciscans more of the feminine idea, like particulars, like the person.
Would you say that if there was a Franciscan in the room with us right now?
Yeah, because the beauty of it actually is when they're both married together.
Yes, I keep thinking about a marriage.
You see them both coming together,
right,
to creating a whole.
The complementarity. You need this sort of I think that JP2 is helpful in this, in that the complementarity between men and women. That women aren't deficient. Men, they're necessary. They are. Women and men, whatever we say about them,
women are definitely better. I mean, I don't think that there's.
Far superior. We talked about this. Women are
I
perfect.
Think so.
Women are perfect by just being given a good start because of the Immaculate Conception, whereas men need to have a divine nature strapped to them to be perfect. So it's just like that's just a, we just didn't have a shot on. We didn't have a shot on this. God's like, Mary, I'm just gonna get you restarted, good to go. So
if you think the
Eve
Mary
failed, restart, good to go. Adam, you failed. can't even restart. I'm just coming there.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna have to keep this. I'm gonna have to hold this guy the entire time. Now it's a hypostatic union, so he's not like holding or wearing human nature as a man or something like this. But like the perfect man, I always thought, oh, Jesus is the perfect man. You're like, yeah, it's kind of unfair though. He's the perfect divine nature.
He's God.
Whereas Mary is the perfect woman, and
she was like,
there's nothing God about her.
Just a creature.
Note to Protestants.
Yeah,
right.
Mary is not God. But she's perfect. She's sinless. It's beautiful. So no, but I like that. I think in a time when we, especially today, again, this is another reason why it's good to have both these guys, I think, and be attentive to both of them, is because these differences between gender are not like are disappointing or accidental, but rather I think they reflect the fundamental differences in, I think, again, this is going to sound bad, the knowing and loving faculty. Like this is, knowing and loving for me carves real deep metaphysically. And I think it's expressed in lots of ways, and one of it I think is the feminine genius and the masculine genius. Men tend to, some sort of abstract, universal kind of stuff, whatever. And women are in particular because they're sensitive, they're attentive to the particular situation and such, and the person. This is men. Men tend to be focusing on objects. Their intellectual life is set up for this sort of stuff, which are objects are by necessity kind of a category, whereas women are set to persons. They have to raise. They're designed physiologically, biologically, psychologically, emotionally to raise a person. I'm designed to move a rock, And so both these, but I think to put them there, and maybe it's not surprising, this is just total wild speculation, but it's a good memory trick, that Scotus would be the defender of the Immaculate Conception, the highest form of and dignity given to a woman.
Indeed.
Because of particular. So I think no, it is a good insight, and I think we ought to, without separating the genders and sexes so much that but we ought to glory in the fact that these are two different, distinct, you could say, aspects or modes of human beings, and both are necessary to each other to make each other better.
And by making those distinctions, you're glorifying them.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because they're different.
Well, you can't. Yeah, exactly. You can't glorify something unless you can separate it from something.
Right.
So like I can't hold something up unless I can take it away from something else.
Right.
And so when we combine them, I think modernity strives to reductionism and monism, this kind of stuff. And instead, I think some qualified dualism in the sense of man and woman as being distinct, real distinct aspects of the human nature, that none of them is not reducible to the other, is so reminder today that it's very, this is really brass tacks, that it matters that you're a woman, and it matters that you're a man, and if we don't have both these things, we will not be fully humans, neither to ourselves or our society, or even that we will not. I don't think we'll be able to relate to God correctly, because you have to relate to God by knowing and loving, and we need the other to teach us each one of those and help us assist in that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, just like these kinds of conversations give me a lot of just gratitude, just make me really feel how awesome God is, right? That he put his thumbprint on every single thing, okay? There's this generative complementarity in the Trinity, and it's in his creation, sub-levels deep. Even here we're talking about our will.
Meta deep.
Yeah, meta deep. That's right.
Yeah.
The will and the intellect still have this generative complementarity, and that you just find it at every level. And it's just amazing.
The fundamental philosophical problem, you could say, or one of maybe perhaps the tradition, is the question of the one and the many, how the one relates to the many and many relates to the one. And I don't think it's wrong to say that that's a fundamental aspect of reality, because God is the unity of the one and the many, and that there's when he creates that one and many reflection is going to be there, and it's going to be sometimes in tension, but about peace and harmony, and sanctification means bringing the one and the many, those things together in harmony, whether it be intellect and will, man, woman, body, soul, all these kind of ones and manys. We are one, even though we have a body and soul. We are one human nature, even though we have man and women. We are one soul, even though we have a mind and an intellect and a will. These kind of the generative aspects there that, again, as you say, stamp out from God, and are aimed to, by realizing that and trying to unite them, getting closer to God's himself in his being this one and many aspect.
So I want to warn people, or maybe give basically a warning of, if somebody says, I want to go read more about Scotus, it's
Yes.
he, based off of what I've read, he does not read like Aquinas. He's a little bit more. He's difficult to read.
And people think Aquinas is hard to read.
Man, Aquinas is a piece of cake after Scotus.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, wow, this is... So where would you suggest, to start? Where's the launching point?
Luckily, it's good. This wouldn't be true a couple years ago, but there's a great gift to the to all people who want to know anything about Scotus. And it's a beautiful book. It's one of the... people might know, for instance, to know Aquinas, they might read G.K. Chesterton's The Dumb Ox. It's just absolutely brilliant. And there's a book that just came out on Scotus called Introduction to... It's Ordered by Love, which you see right there. Intellect and Will. Order by Love. This sort of thing. Ordered by Love, Introduction to Blessed John Duns Scotus. It's by Professor Thomas M. Ward. He's a professor at Baylor. He's got a fantastic mustache. He's a really great guy. He's just fantastic. And he's a Scotus expert. And he produced... It's very short. It's meant to kind of be like the Chesterton. He wanted to call it, Chesterton calls Thomas that he has the dumb ox. And he wanted to call it the tonsured eagle. So Scotus is the tonsured eagle because he makes these distinctions, but as a friend, and it's beautiful. That's a beautiful image, but it is very approachable. It gets you, but it's not just like it's not just devotional literature. It's heavy. He's got great philosophy. He's making all the philosophical points. If you want to understand the formal distinction, hexaity, incarnation, salvation, lesser unities, the analogy versus univocity of the concept of being, all the kind of things that we didn't even talk about, like the tensions, between Thomas and Scotus. It's all in there, but it's in there in an incredibly readable form. It's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and it brings in all situations with his family. It's very friendly. I think it's one of the best books written in a long time. It's a great, if you're just a Catholic and you want to know about how to know and love Jesus and Mary and God and those around you, then this is a great.
Ordered by Love.
Ordered by Love, Thomas M. Ward. Yep, by it's Angelico Press, but you can get it on Amazon or wherever you get your fine books.
And then what would be a primary text that you would suggest?
Yeah, this is tough. There's a Hackett. I mean, see, the problem is Scotus tends to be more of a philosopher than a theologian, and he doesn't write a summa sort of thing. But there is a little collection on. He has some stuff on the Immaculate Conception in a little book that's put out by the Franciscans. The Immaculata or something. They have this. If you type in Blessed John Duns Scotus, Immaculate Conception, it'll collect together some of his writings on the Blessed Virgin Mary, which are quite beautiful. But Scotus, he makes Thomas look like child play because Scotus gets distracted. He's like, he sees something and then he's there's
rabbit
a
hole.
Distinction. He wanders over there and he comes back and then he shows up later.
No, I don't ever do that.
Yeah, the texts are a mess. I even work with the manuscripts when I've done that. They're a pain, and it's not like Thomas where we have these nice kind of ordered arguments. So he's tough, but there are cases of this, and it depends what you want to go into. But he's heavy duty philosophy. But I think starting with the Marian, the kind of Immaculate Conception stuff, would give you a sense and taste of him.
Nice,
sweet. Okay, so we didn't even mention that you're on Godsplaining. I apologize.
Oh, yeah, important. Who cares?
No, that was it's a way bigger podcast. Like everybody who's listened to our podcast
certainly get
already
more
probably
out
know.
of it. If you have an hour for podcasting, you should certainly listen to that.
To Godsplaining.
It's only 30 minutes. We can fit you guys in too. Yeah.
Look, takes us an hour to get 10 minutes of good stuff in.
Yeah.
Usually. So
here we are.
When you're not here.
That's right.
So next week we're gonna talk about art.
Yes.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise